Commissioner Becky Schaefer.
Here.
Commissioner Parrish.
Here.
Commissioner Mason.
Here.
Commissioner Lemke.
Here.
Commissioner Jim Schaefer.
Here.
Alderman Worth.
Here.
Mayor Abendroth.
Here. We have a quorum. First item is approval of the minutes from January 15th.
I move to approve as distributed.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Minutes are approved. Regular business. First item is Dennis Stern. Applicant is seeking minor request approval to allow for an agricultural accessory structure greater than 1,000 square feet for machinery storage for equipment used on agricultural land for the property at 11947 West Highland. Should be road. West Highland Road.
Move approval.
Motion approved.
Second.
Motion and a second. Is there any discussion?
You want to say anything?
I wouldn't say anything. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. You've been approved.
Thank you.
Thank you. Second item is Colliers International for West Bay Commerce, LLC. The applicant is seeking master sign plan approval for the existing multi-tenant building located at 7100 to 7190 West Dungeness Bay Road.
Move approval. Second.
Motion and a second to approve. Is there any discussion? Is there anything you would like to say?
Other than thank you, no.
Okay. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion
Thanks.
carries, and that is approved. Third item is WS Design for A&V Water Jet. The applicant is seeking removal from the table and landscape plan approval for revised plans incorporating conifer trees along the west property line for a new building located at 10601 North Commerce Street, which is in the Mequon Business Park. We thank you for building in the Mequon Business Park.
Move to remove from the table.
Second.
Okay, motion and second to remove from the table. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Item is now before us.
Move to approve.
We have a motion to approve.
Second.
Second, motion and a second to approve.
If I could make some comments, folks. My client is traveling, otherwise he would have been here. He did want me to express his disappointment in this process. When he purchased the parcel in the city park, he was not aware that there was a deficiency in the landscaping, specifically along the west property line. At the Plan Commission meeting in August, where we received approval, members of the condo association spoke as to the concerns. We have worked with the condo association staff. The plans, as you see in front of you, represent 20 additional conifers planted along the west, north, and south property lines at a cost well in excess of $10,000 additional dollars that he's somewhat struck and troubled with. Additionally, the staff is asking for additional trees above and beyond this in the plan report, so he's just wondering why it's his responsibility to resolve a screening problem between a condo association and a city business park that has been there for 15 years. So he wanted me to express his frustration with the process and the costs incurred.
Duly noted. I guess one thing I would say, the land is not owned by the city.
Well, yeah, it's his understanding it was the city business park
It is a
developed
Mequon
in
business
concert
park.
with MLG.
Yeah. Jack, anything to add?
I mean, I guess we didn't require anything above and beyond of this property than we have done any other properties. Yes, this one did have an existing tree line put in as part of the business park, but you know, it's been there for quite some time, and you know, some trees die, they don't survive, and they're not always planted based on a specific site design. So I mean, I don't think we've required anything here above and beyond it. I don't necessarily think the cost of landscaping is really anything out of the ordinary than any other industrial or commercial development that we've approved over the last several years.
Any other comments? We have a motion and a second.
I just add to that, there's one thing to have landscaping for vacant land. It's another thing to have landscaping for a building. And while I think it's, we appreciate, and I'm sure the condo development, I've gotten a variety of positive feedback from the condo association to say thank you, and I wanted to add that. You know, until now, they've been looking at empty land. Now they're going to have a building next to them. So there is a difference, and to ask for that to be put in connection with the building is not out of the ordinary.
No, he just wasn't allowed to, or that wasn't represented by MLG in the process, that he would be incurring $15,000 in landscape costs to screen his neighboring condo complex, which biggest concern is that their tree line is largely ash trees and dying. The condo association hasn't put any landscaping in to screen as part of their development. So it's just, he's investing over $1.5 million in this project and didn't have an extra $15,000 budgeted to screen his property from a condo association. And wasn't led to believe that was going to be a requirement by the MLG folks when the process started, so.
I guess I would also say that, I mean, I'm sure that $15,000 includes all the landscaping. There's only, like
according
10
to-
trees along the back property line. The rest of it is being installed in accordance with our landscaping requirements, so that's two separate issues, and I assume the price includes that for all landscaping.
No, Jack, I was just referring to the landscapers telling us for the 8-foot conifers, they're running about $750 a piece installed, so there's a significant investment back there. But anyways, I'm just reflecting what my client asked me to pass along, commissioners.
Understood. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion
Thank you.
passes. Thank you very much. Next item is Homes by Chapel Hill LLC for Adams. The applicant is seeking reconsideration of a previous approval by the Planning Commission in which a reduced wetland setback was authorized in order to avoid removal of a specimen tree for the property located at 13448 Northwoods Road.
I move approval of the waiver.
Second.
Motion and a second to allow the removal of the house back to where it was before.
No, to allow the waiver
Yes.
at 30 feet.
Okay, we moved the house, now he wants to put it back where it was.
No, they haven't asked for that.
I can clarify. We, back in November, we submitted an application to move the house and change the 50-foot wetland buffer to a 30-foot wetland buffer. There were two reasons for submittal. Number one, we actually had the wetland, the gal that did the wetland delineation send a letter in opining based on the quality of the wetland plants that the 30-foot buffer was appropriate. And by moving the house, it allowed us to save a specimen tree, which is noted on the map there. Unfortunately, Mr. and Mrs. Adams, contractor that was cutting other trees down there, inadvertently cut that tree down. So the tree was cut down. They did not want the tree cut down. But since the tree was removed, and that was one of the reasons that we argued for the reduced wetland buffer, we were advised by staff that we needed to come back in front of the Plan Commission.
So we're keeping the same wetland buffer.
Excuse me?
We're keeping the same wetland buffer,
That is the request.
30-foot wetland buffer.
What's that?
The 30-foot,
The 30-foot, yes.
okay. My mistake. Commissioner Schaefer?
So if we think of our other tree issues that we've dealt with, if someone wants to remove a specimen tree, typically then when we approve it, there's either the payment to the city or the replacement of the tree. Have we talked about that? I mean, it's unfortunate that happened. Mistakes happen. We can't go back, but is there?
Yeah, one of the conditions in the report was that they have to comply with the requirements of the tree preservation ordinance, which basically states that they have to provide compensation to the Mequon Tree Fund for 100% of the value of that tree. Plus, we typically in these cases have issued a citation along with that.
So
And
that
that's
that's happening regardless of
Yes.
whether the
whether the setback
whether the
is 30 or 50.
setback stays or
Yes.
is reverted. Okay.
So we have a motion and a second to approve the waiver. Any Any further discussion?
You want to talk about it?
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Sorry.
I'm sorry. I just saw that staff recommended denial, so I didn't know if Jack wanted to, if we wanted. I mean, I know we're moving at record pace here, and I don't want to slow it down, but I would like to understand what staff is thinking. Is that
Well,
okay?
again, the justification for the waiver originally was to preserve the tree, and now that the tree is no longer there, the justification somewhat goes away. I know we have talked, and this is more of a procedural issue, but I've had spoken to the neighbor directly to the east as well, who has also the 50-foot wetland buffer, and originally talked about getting that reduced to 30, and at the time, my comment is in this case, if you want to reduce that wetland buffer, if you think it was done incorrectly at the time of the CSM, it would require some sort of amendment to that CSM. So, I mean, at the end of the day, would we look at the 30-foot wetland buffer if there's scientific evidence that there is a need for it or that it's justifiable? Sure. But I didn't think this process was the process to go through in order to approve that.
But the tree was only part of the justification. We submitted the letter from Alice Thompson, who did the initial delineation. So
But that would not have come through this body as part of a specimen tree removal request. It would have come through as a CSM amendment or some sort of corrective instrument of the CSM. And that was not in front of us as an action item.
Well, in the application, one of the requests for relief is waiver of a setback restriction. So that we filed the application originally, we asked for removal of the tree or waiver of the setback. We needed one or the other. We preferred to preserve the tree and get the waiver of the setback,
Which is what was approved.
which is what was approved, right? And the city forester, as part of that review, indicated that, look, if the plan commission would prefer to have the tree removed, then there was a, compensation for that, either replacement of a certain number of trees or compensation by the Adams. And the Adams are fine with, they're fine with paying the $1,200 contribution or planting replacement trees. Their plan obviously is not to plant a bunch of replacement trees because they would have preferred to keep that tree there.
Commissioner Worth?
A question for staff. If there had been no tree here and they asked for a waiver, is that something that this body could, I recognize that maybe the cleaner method of handling this would be an amendment to the CSM. But would this body have been able to address that issue upon application?
I spoke with the city attorney about that because of the question on the neighboring property as well, and he basically agreed with staff that there would have to be some sort of amendment to that CSM, whether it be a corrective instrument or an actual an updated CSM to reduce that setback. That would be the path that would come in front of this body.
How many lots are on the CSM?
It was just 3 lots, but this one is a combination of 2. So it was
There's only 2 properties.
2 properties, right?
So wouldn't it make some sense? I mean, I went back and watched the video from last meeting in preparation for this. And while it was about the tree, there was probably more discussion about the fact that the house was in a better location in the with this 30-foot setback, and the fact that at the time you had suggested that you didn't really think the 50-foot was necessary based on whatever it is that makes something need to be 30 or 50 feet, and that had been a mistake on the CSM. So I'm all in favor of letting them build the house where it's supposed to be. I also would like to make sure we're doing this procedurally correctly. And so I'm trying to figure out, I thought it was easy enough to just affirm the waiver we already granted. But I also don't want to set a precedent for future property owners. If we need to correct it for both properties and they're both going to want it anyhow, why not fix the CSM? I'm assuming they're not putting a shovel in the ground this month anyhow until it thaws, but maybe I'm wrong.
Well, actually, we've done all the surveying and the engineering, so we are in for permit. So if this is approved within the next couple of weeks, we'd like to proceed to get the building permit. But I want to make sure procedurally now that, based on the plan commission's decision, we can just have the surveyor do an affidavit of correction on the CSM rather than having a whole new CSM come back through this formal CSM approval process.
And what would that process to fix the CSM?
It could be, I believe it could be done as an affidavit of correction, but I still would think that this body would have to formally approve that.
Do we have to see it, or do we have to approve that we change the wetland line?
I think we would have to approve the corrective instrument of the CSM, since we approved the original CSM with the wetland setback.
But we couldn't approve an amendment to the CSM to be identical to the existing CSM, except changing the setback from 50 to 30 feet? That's a pretty specific amendment that we would be authorizing.
I mean, I think we can do that. I just don't, it wasn't what was in front of you at the last meeting with the specimen tree removal, and that's why we reconsidered this one.
Right, I'm just thinking that that might be it gets us to the result we want, but be the more logical path of doing that rather than a waiver.
Yeah, I mean, again, we can work on, and I'd have to speak to the neighboring property who would be in favor of that as well, because they have a very small wetland that's basically has a 50-foot buffer around the entire thing that probably isn't applicable either, and I would assume they would be interested in that as well. But they would have to formally make the application and come in, and we could do it together. But I just felt that this process was a separate process with probably the same result.
We would have had the same result if the tree had stayed there.
If the tree had stayed there, we wouldn't
be changing.
we wouldn't be here,
the
and I'm
tree.
assuming we
Right,
wouldn't
but
have.
we were,
wouldn't have-
if the tree had stayed there, we have the ability under the specimen tree ordinance to modify setbacks, et cetera, in order to preserve a tree. So there was justification under that section of the code with regard to the setback. But now that the tree is gone, that's why we had to reconsider this.
Well, we did it right when the tree was there, so we should just forget about that. Mr. Schaefer.
I live in the neighborhood, and I walked the property before the snow came. And I think keeping that setback at 30 feet is a good idea. It'll give them a little more of a backyard. It'll give them also a little more separation from the Cerniacs. So I think it's a good plan.
I'd like to modify the motion I made.
We already approved the motion.
No, we didn't.
Yeah, we did. We voted.
Oh, we did.
I didn't vote.
You didn't vote?
I raised my hand because I wanted to ask.
I voted.
I voted.
You can call.
You voted?
I voted.
I voted. You voted.
All right, well, if you declared we have a vote, we should stop talking.
You vote?
I don't know.
Well, I never got to say, does anybody object? But apparently you do.
I was simply going to procedurally make it correct that if a new CSM comes back for the property for the development, that as part of this, that this property owner will, share in the cost of paying for that CSM to correct the setback for the development. I think that's logical. On that, you put the burden on the other property owner, or we'd go through the same kind of backwards method of approving their a variance also. And
What does it cost to change the CSM?
I'm not sure I mean, again, an affidavit correction from a surveyor, I can't believe it would be that all
It's a few
that
$100.
expensive.
The
Probably less
homeowner
than-
would pay for the
Probably
affidavit.
less than chopping down a tree that wasn't supposed to be chopped down.
The homeowner would pay for the affidavit of correction. I just want to make clear that this body has approved the reduction of the buffer from 50 feet to 30 feet, and that we don't have to go back to another meeting here to make a formal rubber stamp of an affidavit of correction that changes that buffer. That based on this approval, we can submit the affidavit to city staff as long as it complies with the direction of this plan commission, then we're ready to have the building permit released.
Okay. With that understanding and the motion to approve the waiver, let's vote one more time. You understand? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The waiver is granted.
Thank you.
Thank you. March Planning Commission will meet at 4:30 on Monday, the 12th. Does anyone have an objection to that? Seeing none, I look for a
Move to
mo-
adjourn.
Second.
Motion and a second to adjourn. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you all for, so I guess that was after rooting and short